Welcome to SpyHards podcast. For the next hour, your hosts will go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the NOC List. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam, the provocateur.
And Cam, I believe we have two stalkers following us discreetly this week.
We do indeed.
They're dropping in from the ceiling. It's Nathan and Aaron from the Impodible podcast. Welcome aboard, lads.
You know, I want to object to being called a stalker, but it's fair. It's okay.
No, I'm totally stalking you guys. How are you guys doing?
We're doing good. How about you? So let's just start with Nathan. Tell us a little bit about Mission Impodible.
Okay, so I've always loved the Mission Impossible TV show so much that, like, the 96 movie, which is technically our first episode, I have a lot of mixed feelings on. And me, Aaron, and a couple other friends are all in a group thread that we just ended up talking about them. And somebody's like, why isn't there a podcast about it? And me and Aaron were both sort of convinced that we both had said that. And somebody inadvertently kind of, like, came up with the idea for the podcast that we have stolen. So we kind of just go movie by show, episode by movie, and go through the entire franchise because there's a lot of crazy shit in there, and there's a lot of good shit in there.
Yeah, we're working our way through the first season right now. It is insane.
Yeah, we've had ghost episodes. I mean, we have LSD sugar cubes coming up soonish. We have a lot of crazy shit, a lot of crazy guest stars, and yeah, if you just feel like, hey, I didn't know there was a Mission Impossible TV show, we are here with you. We also do a few interviews. We got a lot of cool shit coming up.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Aaron, how do you view like the franchise as a whole? Is it a franchise to you that always felt confident, or is it one that took maybe a long time to find its really secure footing, or what?
Mission Impossible?
Yeah.
So I was one of the people who discovered it by the movies. I knew that it existed prior to that, and it wasn't until now that I've gone back to rewatch the show. But I mean, Mission Impossible as a TV series, even back in '66, was cleaning up Emmys left and right. Like, it hit the ground running and was this massively influential and popular show that lasted about 7 years. Got remade in the 80s, which may or may not have been a writer's strike thing. And so it's weird and it's goofy and strange, but we still love it. And then the movie is just kind of hit with Tom Cruise. And what's kind of fun is that for all that they've made, all these different iterations of it, they all technically exist in the exact same canon. There's never been a real honest-to-God reboot. So I'm going to say, yeah, it's a damn fine franchise that's been running strong for about 80 years now.
The thing that I find to be very interesting about it, I mean, the movies really don't have, they take a while to get their footing. I would say Mission Impossible 3 sort of sets the table for 4, 5, 6, and I'll assume 7 and 8 to just sort of keep going. But the show sort of was the 60s equivalent of like a Game of Thrones, where it's like, hey, it's this show that everybody's watching.
Right.
So, barring Mission Impossible, obviously I know that's your main passion, but any other films in the spy genre or TV shows that you guys like particularly?
Oh, man.
Ooh.
I grew up as like a huge James Bond fan. I mean, Here's a little fun fact. On my 7th birthday, I had a 007 birthday, which my dad handed me my first vodka martini, which fucking Wisconsin. And
Wow.
if you guys are not aware, I do have very toxic parents. It's brought up in my podcast that I assume they never listen to or do. But yeah, I grew up a huge Bond fan. I actually, funny enough, I had a book that was just all the major spy movies, and it was just fucking Men in Black, James Bond. It was advertising for Die Another Day at the point. It had Triple X, and then it had Mission Impossible 2, which was funny because once you flip through Triple X and Mission Impossible 2, they kind of look like the same movie.
Yeah, what about you, Aaron?
I was going to say, I was into James Bond as a kid as well. Got into it when GoldenEye came out when I was in junior high, and retroactively went through the rest of the franchise and have pretty much watched them all since. I'm a huge fan of the genre, although I tend to enjoy more realistic spycraft, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy type movies, I find. Or like, I'm a really big fan of Ed Brubaker's Velvet, which is a James Bond-esque comic book, basically where you find out that Moneypenny was more badass than Bond, and it's all about her. Not literally, but that's essentially what it is. It's a great book.
I've heard that's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, I also like the very, like, gritty, like, The Conversation, 3 Days of the Condor, which I know you guys just recently did.
Sneakers.
One of my favorite things that I've ever gotten for my birthday is, around my birthday, Kingsman: The Secret Service came out. So I'm a huge fan of goofy spy shit, too.
Right, yeah. We can't wait to do the Kingsman franchise on the show for sure.
Well, if you need somebody, I am here watching you guys.
Okay.
Well, we lured you both in here saying that we were going to cover a Mission Impossible film, but I'm about to rip off my latex mask and get Cam to unveil what we're covering this week.
Oh, fuck.
That's right.
Wait.
We are going back to the year 2007 to talk about the third Jason Bourne film, The Bourne Ultimatum.
What?
I have amnesia.
I had no
What are those
idea.
movies?
Guys, I watched Mission Impossible 3 for this. Are you kidding?
Well, so did I, to be fair.
Yeah. Like you need an excuse to watch that film.
I watched Mission Impossible versus the Mob, the UK cut of 2 episodes. What the fuck, guys?
Yeah, so sorry about that, gents, but hopefully you can cast your minds back to 2007. Hopefully you caught it in the theaters and have some opinions about it.
I actually did and do.
Good stuff. Cool. Well, let's take off with everyone's favorite, the letterboxd.com synopsis. Any bets on length?
I'm going to assume not very long.
Nah, I'm going to say that it's going to be surprisingly long for the movie of this kind. It's going to get really deep into the twisty weeds.
I'm going to say 8 lines. So
okay. All right. Let's do this. The Bourne Ultimatum. Remember everything, forgive nothing. Bourne is brought out of hiding once again by reporter Simon Ross, who is trying to unveil Operation Blackbriar, an upgrade to Project Treadstone, in a series of newspaper columns. Information from the reporter stirs a new set of memories, and Bourne must finally uncover his dark past while dodging the company's best efforts to eradicate him.
Okay, that's not so bad. When they started naming the journalist, I was like, we're in trouble here, folks.
Yeah,
but
same.
Not so bad.
Well, it's like the first 6 lines are basically the opening 10 minutes of the film.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'll give this one like a B-. It's fine.
It was 8 lines for reference.
Nice. Bingo. Nailed
it. There we go. So I will throw it out to Nathan and Aaron, our guests, first. Do you guys have any recollection of this when it came out at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
2007 was an interesting year for movies, just in general. I mean, we had a lot of great, like, a lot of people remember 2007 as being a great year because you had movies like No Country for Old Men, There Will Be Blood, 3:10 to Yuma, just a lot of, like, great sort of prestige movies. But it was kind of a dumping ground as far as, like, disappointing sequels that year. I mean, we had Spider-Man 3, Shrek the Third, one that I actually quite like a lot, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. But for the most part, people really didn't feel positively about most of the movies coming out that blockbuster year. I think one that people were actually more positive on that is now swayed more negative was Transformers, which I do have fond memories of seeing in a theater, but The Bourne Ultimatum was kind of seen as a bright light in that summer.
What about you, Aaron?
So I specifically remember seeing this at a Regal Metropolitan Theater with my mom, and I remember going into this. It was pretty big because, like, the first Bourne Identity it came out and kind of splash, and holy shit, Matt Damon's an action star. And then you get into the Supremacy, where they hire Paul Greengrass, and he kind of explodes the action world with his shaky cam filmography, and it's a hit. And so I remember when the third one came out, that was far enough in that you had people who were like, I hate this franchise, it sucks exclusively because of the camera style that they filmed it in. And I remember that, like, in advance, they had kind of talked about the fact that it overlapped with the second one, and, like, it has that weird structure to it. And so, like, I went into this movie very hesitant and a little worried that it might not be good, and instead witnessed the birth of an entirely new subgenre of film, the stupid smart movie, or the smart stupid movie. And that's not an insult, by the way. Trust me, I dig that genre.
I just, I realized I never really watched this movie in a theater. I remember renting it off of Netflix because at that time, I was constantly searching for more spy movies, and I was so excited for Casino Royale that I read the book for it, and my parents were like, yeah, we'll take you to go see it, till they watched Oprah talk about the ball torture scene. And they're like, we're not allowing you to see this. We heard about some crazy shit in that. And I'm like, yeah, I read the book. Lashif said that he was going to cut off his balls and put them in his mouth. So I heard that it was like the Bourne movies and realized I've never seen any of the Bourne movies. So I kind of watched them all in secret in our camper in my backyard. So I kind of like associate them with being in the camper. But yes, on to you, Cam.
Yeah, for me, as I've said before, I wasn't like a big fan of the Bourne franchise. They were just movies I watched and really didn't think of past the point of, the 2 hours I spent with them. And I do remember going to this in that disappointing summer you referred to, Nathan, where, I guess the highlights were like Superbad came out that summer, or also like I did enjoy Live Free or Die Hard, or Die Hard 4.0 as it's known, on the other side of the pond.
Woo-woo.
Like that was one where I was like, okay, that was kind of fun. But otherwise, I was really unhappy with that summer. And Spider-Man 3 was a movie that I really was in Phantom Menace syndrome, convincing myself I liked it a lot, even though I was bothered by a lot of it. But I remember
it's good for 1 hour.
It is, yes.
Is it?
It is pretty great in parts. But I remember this came out, and I went and saw it with a buddy, and walked out being like, yeah, I enjoyed it, same as the other Bourne movies. And I really didn't give it maybe the thought it deserved in some ways. But it was a movie I had generally positive thoughts on overall. What about you, Scott?
I am continuing my tradition of not having seen them in the cinema. I think in the end, I watched most of the Bourne films on home video some way, either renting or on Sky Movies, I guess, or HBO would be the American version. So yeah, I did not see it at the time, so I have no memory, unfortunately.
Right.
Cam, obviously Nathan mentioned a bit about the year of 2007, but can you give us a bit of information about how Ultimatum came to be?
Yeah, so Ultimatum was a really rough production in a lot of ways. So Paul Greengrass obviously hit it out of the park with Bourne Supremacy, and as we were talking about Spider-Man 3 a couple minutes ago, this kind of fell into that Spider-Man 3 problem where you had a third entry of a franchise that was on like the rise, like the money was really coming in. And a lot of people had a lot of opinions about how the third Bourne film should come together. And a lot of the conflict comes from Paul Greengrass and writer Tony Gilroy. Tony Gilroy had worked on the previous two, and he disagreed with a lot of what Paul Greengrass had done with Supremacy, even though that movie I think was a real triumph. But there was some kind of hurt feelings there. Somehow, Tony Gilroy made a deal with the studio that he would write a first draft of the Bourne Ultimatum with no input, and he would only do one draft. I have no idea how this works, and he would get a massive amount of money. And so he delivered a draft that did not go over well. I have a quote from Matt Damon about that draft. He says, "I don't blame Tony for taking a boatload of money and handing in what he handed in. It's just that it was unreadable. This is a career ender. I mean, I could put this thing up on eBay, and it would be game over for that dude. It's terrible. It's really embarrassing."
Jesus.
I actually remember the story of that going on. Not the quote. I never knew the quality of the script. That is delightful.
That's insane.
And Matt Damon is not a guy, I think you'd all agree, that is not known to really snipe to the press or, publicly about any of his projects.
Yeah, he's not Ed Norton.
No, yeah, there's a good example. We'll talk about him in the next Bourne film. But, so Tony Gilroy departed after his one draft. And so then they were really, freaked out because they had a hard deadline for this movie. As so often with franchises now, they've got the deadline. The movie has to be made by then, and it's just a race to get it done. They brought in Tom Stoppard, who wrote Brazil and Shakespeare in Love. He put something together they did not use at all. Tom Stoppard says he doesn't think they used a single word of his script. So then they turned basically to two writers, Scott Z. Burns, who was a producer on the documentary An Inconvenient Truth, as well as the writer-director of an indie film called PU 239. He's more notable now for having moved on and done a lot of Steven Soderbergh's movies like The Informant, Contagion, Side Effects, The Laundromat. He also wrote and directed a movie last year called The Report that people should check out. It's really, really good. But he was pretty new at this point, so he was brought in, as well as George Nolfi, who'd written Ocean's 12 and the movie Timeline, the Michael Crichton adaptation. And basically, these two guys hammered this movie together at a frantic pace, and with input. Also, Paul Greengrass wrote sections himself with the editor Chris Rouse, who's done several of these Bourne movies, as well as all the other Paul Greengrass films. Basically, it was four writers frantically rewriting this thing to meet a deadline. Not the best way to go. I think you'd agree.
To your point, I think you're right. And actually, one of the things that fascinates me about the Bourne franchise as a whole is that it is all based on a book series, right?
Yes.
Flat out, every single one, there's a Bourne Ultimatum, there's a Bourne Supremacy, there's a Bourne Identity, and also, without exception, not a single one of them bear almost any resemblance to their source material. They are drastically different with different characters and focuses and storylines. I feel like it's one where Tony Gilroy, I think the actual story was that, he had read the book once or along some lines like that and basically just went, nope, this is the story I'm going to write and go with it. So It kind of fits.
Yeah, because the original novel by Robert Ludlum is about David Webb tracking down his old enemy, Carlos the Jackal, who's targeted his family who's in the Caribbean. None of that is in this film.
Yeah, and the Jackal is the main antagonist of the entire franchise.
Yeah.
And he's not even mentioned, I don't think, in the entire film series.
It's actually kind of surprising they didn't make the Jackal the villain of one of the movies.
Well, it's also why, and I was dumber when I was younger, but why I thought that the Bourne movies and the actual movie called The Jackal that has Bruce Willis as the assassin, I legit thought that those must have been based on the same book series. And it's just because this Carlos the Jackal is kind of a semi-real person, apparently, or at least I think. And so there's a lot of different characters and media based on them.
Right. So basically, when this whole thing was put together, the production itself doesn't sound like it was any real issue in terms of, the day-to-day on set. It was just all writing. It was frantically rewriting this movie through production. I know that there was a lot of stories after the fact that both Damon and Greengrass were genuinely shocked that the movie turned out really good and was very well received, because they really thought they had a disaster on their hands. And I'm curious, did any of you remember that at the time?
I don't remember any of it, because the thing is, with me, I watched all of them back to back, and my only thought was oh, Tony Gilroy, what a writer, because, well, these are what Aaron referred to, and I'll agree with, dumb, smart movies. They're fun, they're loud, they're mindless, they're perfect summer movies. I always thought, wow, these are pretty well scripted. And I always gave all the credit to Gilroy, but I never really realized that there was so much trouble with this one.
Yeah, and I mean, we got to give points to Gilroy. The year this comes out, he writes and directs Michael Clayton, which is a fantastic movie, and he was Oscar nominated. So I just think it was creative differences with Greengrass that, for some reason, even though they maybe clashed on Supremacy, I felt like they really came together in a product that really delivered. And I guess just at this point, the feelings just weren't working out so well. And Gilroy actually later arbitrated with the Writers Guild of America to get sole credit for this film, but was denied. To which Matt Damon said, "That was just a little bit of justice, I have to say."
Holy shit.
I believe that is what the kids call a bad look.
Did you say they made up again, or afterwards, or?
Matt Damon has since come out and apologized and said, "I really shouldn't have said that publicly, but it's a lot of fun to recite now."
Yeah.
That's insane.
I guess as of 2009, Tony Gilroy had still never seen the Bourne Ultimatum. So he was arbitrating at a time where he hadn't even seen the movie, I guess, to even determine if it was based on his stuff. Very crazy. Hollywood, man. But nonetheless, the movie was a big hit. It had a budget of $110 million. Domestically, it made $227, international $217, for a worldwide total of $444 million. For comparison's sake, Supremacy did $291 million, and Identity did $214. So this was considerable growth for a franchise, and I'm sure that Universal was a little nervous, given that this one was sort of written as a trilogy closer.
That was going to be one of my questions in the sort of briefing section was, did Matt Damon sign on as this was his, bowing out of the character, his Wrath of Khan for Spock?
Right. I never got that sense. It was more just like he'd get excited about a Paul Greengrass idea and be like, yeah, let's do another one. But a lot of the kind of the buzz around this movie, this Ultimatum film, was that Matt Damon was like, okay, that's good. I'm okay. He did work with Greengrass again on, the Green Zone, I think the following year. So it's not like there was hard feelings there. I think just the process of making a franchise that is very lucrative, there's a lot of stresses that come with that.
Or as the Green Zone is known in America as Bourne, but in Iraq this time.
Very true.
This was the era of we're not quite sure if we're going to keep these franchise goings. Because this was right when The Dark Knight came out, the year prior. And I remember when that came out too, everyone was like, yeah, you're going to do a third, right? And the collective group kind of went, nah, probably not. And it wasn't until a few years later that they got Dark Knight Rises. And I remember when this was going on, there was a lot of people going like, well, clearly you're going to make more. And everyone was just going, I'm kind of okay without.
This is also the era of trilogies, where it's always like, well, you're going to make a trilogy, right? But you would never make a part 4 or a 5 necessarily. It's all about the trilogy.
Yeah, because only horror movies have 4 and 5, and then they're always bad after that, he says with sarcasm.
Yeah, 2008 sort of just changed the landscape because, we got The Dark Knight, which was kind of a reflection of where franchises were going. Iron Man came out, and then Incredible Hulk, and sort of just wiped the table with the idea of franchises reaching into duologies or trilogies or finding realism.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, this movie was number 11 for the year at the worldwide box office, right between 300 and Live Free or Die Hard / Die Hard 4.0. So it's in good company. It's funny to look back, though, at how big 300 was.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, 300 was a thing.
It was. It had amazing trailers. As for the top 3 that year, number 1, we referenced it earlier, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End was number 1. Number 2.
I can't believe that's your favorite, Nathan.
I never said that was my favorite of the series.
No, that's official quote, my favorite of the series.
No.
I'm pretty sure, did you not? Did you just say you like it? Which is still kind of I'm going to make fun of you for it, even though I do too.
Fuck you. No, my favorite of the franchise is Curse of the Black Pearl, as it always will be.
Sure.
If you want to make fun of me, just bring up Jurassic Park.
Uh-oh. The Lost World?
No, Jurassic Park 3 is incredible.
Oh,
jeez.
Aaron.
Well, when we do a movie from 2001, you'll have to come back and talk about Jurassic Park 3. Wax poetic.
I'm sorry. I can't be responsible for him.
I'll be on for Spy Game.
Number 2 for the year was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. And number 3 was Spider-Man 3, as we referenced earlier. Some other notables that year. At number 16, you had Ocean's 13, which obviously featured Matt Damon. At number 58, you had Michael Clayton, which we referenced. Tony Gilroy wrote and directed that film. And at number 60, you had the movie Fracture with David Strathairn showing up in that. It was a legal drama. And then down at number 108, you had a very serious spy film called Breach with Ryan Felipe and Chris Cooper. Chris Cooper, of course, of The Bourne Identity. Really worth checking out, and we will cover it at some point on the podcast.
I really like that movie, Breach. Also,
I did too.
Also, it's funny to mention, now that I know about this behind-the-scenes struggle between Matt Damon and Tony Gilroy, they make a lot of jokes about the Bourne franchise that are super subtle in Ocean's 13, including like pretty much a roofie drug being called a Gilroy.
Oh my God, really? I don't remember that.
Yeah, and even the first scene where Matt Damon shows up, it's done in a shaky cam format. They're following him through like some subway, and he's like, I know my cover's blown. I don't know where I am. Shit, I don't even know who I am.
Wow. I mean, it's very telling that Matt Damon did not go on to work on any Tony Gilroy films, but he did go and star in one of the other writers, George Nolfi's next film, The Adjustment Bureau. So obviously, Matt Damon more of a fan of George Nolfi than Tony Gilroy.
Yeah, it's just crazy. I never had known that.
I still can't believe the Ocean's 13 thing. That's crazy.
Yeah, no, give it a watch. Also, another fun thing to look back at Ocean's 13 about, and I know this isn't an Ocean's 13 podcast, but Al Pacino pretty much plays a parody of Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah, big time. Big time. So, yeah, that pretty much wraps me up for this year, and we will talk a lot more about Tony Gilroy when we do the next Bourne film, The Bourne Legacy, because he wrote and directed that. So, to be continued in terms of the Gilroy drama, I guess, going forward. But, yeah, moving on, Scott.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's crazy. I saw the top 3 films of that year in the cinema, but I never caught the Bournes at all. So I'll just carry that tradition on. Well, gentlemen, let's get into the meat of the film. There are 4 of us, and we have 2 guests. Now, we'll start with you, Aaron. What did you think about Bourne Ultimatum when you went back to revisit it in 2020?
I think it's a great action movie. I think Paul Greengrass and Matt Damon have definitely hit their stride in making effective tense sequences that pull you in and carry you through. There's not a dull one in the movie, and in fact, some of my favorite action movies of a couple of my favorite action scenes of the last 10 years end up in this franchise, in this movie specifically. However, and this is going to come as no surprise considering what we've already talked about, I have issues with the story. I remember even back when I originally saw this, I kind of had a lot of problems with the fact that half of this movie technically takes place in the Bourne Supremacy. And I can even remember being in theaters and they get to that scene where it finally catches up and going, whoa, what? Like, we've done all this just to get to there?
Right.
Okay. And I do think this movie suffers from being a smart, dumb movie, which we've kind of joked about that a bit. Basically what it is it's a movie that looks and sounds smart. They're almost always political thrillers. They usually have really good, I'm going to call it, in quotes, realistic action. It's more naturalistic action, but they're really just big, dumb action movies. Like the Jack Ryan TV series is the perfect exemplar of this. It's a great show, but it's kind of dumb. And so, like, this movie is okay. It has some script problems. The character of Bourne doesn't really grow much. The story is still them dealing with the ramifications of mistakes made before the first movie happened. I would like them to move this world forward and keep the same characters. But that action part of it is amazing. So it was good.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just reply to that bit about Jason Bourne's sort of character arc. I was surprised, I think, when I watched it originally and I rewatched it now, how he just doesn't go anywhere in the third film. The first 2 feel like his character grows a little bit, but this third one, I don't understand why he wants to go back. I don't get the emphasis of why he wants to get involved even further in this world that he clearly doesn't like.
Well, what about you, Nathan? What were your thoughts this time?
So I rewatched the entire trilogy and listened to your episodes because guess what? I'm a good guest host. You guys can tell all of your friends that.
Nerd.
But I've always kind of never had the Bourne films be my thing. You know, I enjoy them as fun little action movies, but I never like get done with one of them. I'm like, man, I need to go see that again, or man, I need to watch that again. So I hadn't seen them in about 10 years. And, you know, the Bourne Ultimatum is one of those movies where it does exactly what it sets out and it succeeds at it. It doesn't do anything more than that, but in a lot of ways, it's not that's not so bad. It's a fire and forget, enjoyable like time passer. The thing about the Bourne movies is that they're well directed. Up until what I heard just during this podcast, I would say well written, well acted, but they're kind of vacuous. You know, they're really sort of mindless films. I mean, they don't really require you to have anything but a pulse. Like, I could go to the bathroom during this movie and ask my roommate who was watching it at the time, hey man, what's going on? And he'll be like, well, Jason Bourne's trying to figure out who he is, and he just beat up like 5 guys, and you know, the local authorities just figured out where he is, and you know, there's a highly trained agent after him who becomes inept in about 10 minutes.
Isn't it funny you've described most of the scenes from all the 3 films?
Exactly. And that's exactly sort of the issue with it. But I will say these last 2 are a testament to Paul Greengrass as a director, which, I mean, we didn't really mention. He just came off of doing United 93, which I think is a legitimately great film.
Yeah, that's his best film, I think.
Oh, yeah. And his raw documentary style sort of gives this gritty believability to pretty extreme and outlandish sequences, but he does this style of action, the shaky cam, almost like you watched on the street, better than any other director. And it was one of those styles that was imitated for a while until I would say either like, well, to mention Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol or John Wick sort of led to more of these like highly choreographed hand-to-hand combat scenes where you never cut away from it.
Well, you referenced earlier The Dark Knight, and all of the Nolan action, you know, in those Batman films is completely echoing what's being done by Paul Greengrass here.
Yeah, and you can sort of see the pendulum switch over with The Dark Knight Rises on that film, where he doesn't cut away as many times. Like, he'll stay with Batman during his fight with Bane. And, you know, Paul Greengrass, you say shaky cam and you immediately are like, this is going to be a nightmare. This is perhaps the most effective shaky cam action film ever. Like, Bourne versus Dash is one of the best fight scenes of the 2000s.
So, like, it's interesting that you mentioned The Dark Knight with the film style. I remember when this originally came out, and there was a good chunk, because I was in college. I had just gotten out of film school when this had just come out, and a lot of my friends hated it because the dreaded shaky cam. And the way I used to defend this movie was, I would say he shot it like he shoots a comic book film, because you get little seconds of imagery and you have just enough time to actually register what you see, and yes, cutting too quickly and all that, but he shows you everything you need to see like a little comic book panel. Just cuts to that, cuts to that, cuts to that. And if you're keeping your eyes on the screen, you can usually tell what's going on. I've come to understand a little bit more the problems that people have with the filming style, but it very much felt like a comic book to me when I saw it.
Well, like, as far as I look at it, the thing with Paul Greengrass action is he never loses the geography of what's going on. So you're never confused. You may, get kind of caught up in the editing, because obviously it's really crazy editing, and, the camera's obviously doing the cinema verite thing where the camera's shaking, but it's a handheld camera. But I mean, what's going on moment to moment. And I think, you look at the imitators, like I think of not just, the Batman films, which are actually really well made movies. You look at something, say, like the Clash of the Titans remake, or, Quantum of Solace, and they don't know how to do it. And it gets actually visually confusing to look at.
God,
what do you think?
Quantum of Solace.
I'm a Quantum of Solace defender, despite that hardly being a movie. It's a great fourth act to Casino Royale.
Sure. A great one? Well, we'll have to visit that later down the road. Scott, I'm curious, what were your thoughts visiting it this time?
Well, I just wanted to sort of jump on the bandwagon of the action sequences in this film are terrific. There's no quibble about that, and you can follow the action through thoroughly. My quibble with the shaky cam footage in this is when it comes to the more emotional scenes. There's a scene right at the beginning where Bourne is talking to, I think, Maria's brother.
Right.
And they can't hold the frame on Bourne's face. It's like someone's like on a vibrating machine as they're trying to film him. And I just think like you can hold the camera steady for this, surely.
Actually, funnily enough, a lot of times that's how they do it, is they'll have somebody stand behind the camera operator and try and give it a little shake, and so the camera operator is trying to hold it steady. So you're not wrong.
So, but like Scott, did you find, revisiting this movie, like how did it hold up for you in comparison to Supremacy, which we really enjoyed?
I'll tackle the film itself before I compare it to anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a terrific action film.
Yeah.
It's a solid 2 hours suspense. It keeps you on the edge of your seat, just like Supremacy does. And I suppose I'm comparing at this point. I just feel like it's one step back from Supremacy in my mind.
Right.
It's like they built up all this momentum from sort of the character piece of Identity to the thriller of Supremacy. And now we just have an action film.
Yeah, Supremacy has that revenge arc that drives it like nothing else.
Yeah, that's where I came down too. Like, I really loved Supremacy for what it did with the Bourne character, and you got this revenge / kind of wandering samurai storyline that I thought really paid off. This one, it kind of forsakes character to be more of a movie about world building, and I think in terms of Jason Bourne world building, it's really effective when you've got actors like David Strathairn or Scott Glenn or Joan Allen speaking this dialogue. I am invested 100%. But this movie has, I feel like, a little bit of Return of the Jedi syndrome, where it's echoing a lot of what we've seen in the previous films, trying to kind of wrap it up, but it doesn't feel like it delivers anything that kind of tops what we've seen before. This really does feel kind of like the original Star Wars trilogy in some ways, where you kind of have like the naive introduction film, which is kind of a surprise hit that people love. The second one, which is the darker one that just really nails the narrative and all the character aspects. And then the third one that kind of wraps it all up, echoes moments from the previous ones, kind of gives you what you want, the big action scenes, but feels a little bit emptier. So I enjoyed the movie a lot. I think the action, we've talked about, was unbelievably incredible to watch. But as a satisfying character story for Bourne, I just found it a little less than Bourne Supremacy.
See, that's where I actually disagree. I actually consider this to be the best the franchise has to offer. As far as the plotting, yeah, it's razor thin, but I think I kind of like that about it. It's just the thing about it is it gets rid of all of the all of the government scenes. Like, we know that Treadstone is really corrupt, so it just really has bare minimum of that. We know that Bourne's on the run. It's just a lean chase movie that's really, really fun, and I think it has the best action that the franchise has. I think that it's the best paced out of all of it. I think the big thing with these movies are that there's sort of this prestige about it with Paul Greengrass coming on board, that these are thinking man's action movies, and they really aren't. Like, Six Underground requires more of your brain power. Not because Six Underground is a smart movie, but because you have to suspend your disbelief in certain scenes. With the Bourne movies, you just sort of are on autopilot, but it's a good autopilot, and it delivers an action experience, which is what Paul Greengrass brought to it in Bourne Supremacy. And I think he just ramps it up more in this one.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually the second mention of Six Underground we've had on the podcast so far, just for those keeping track. I don't know why we keep talking about this film.
Because it's amazing.
Is it?
I love it.
No.
But yeah, this film for me works best when it's doing exactly what you said, when it's a chase film, when Bourne is on the run or trying to get answers. But then it hits this sort of block about the last 20, 25 minutes of the film where he gets to the what's the name of the guy? Dr. Hish, I believe it is.
Right.
And you finally see how the sausage is made, as the saying goes. And I couldn't care less.
Well, I don't think there's anything in this, huge revelation that's shocking. That's the thing. It's like when you actually get there, you're like, oh, yeah, sure, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. And it's the sort of revelation where it's like, you understand how many like military men are actually sent out like that in America, like Black Forest? The thing about Jason Bourne is he is sort of, a lot of people were like, man, this is original, this is so different than Bond. He's really just a martial arts version of any protagonist in a paranoid 70s thriller. I mean, he's kind of outside of the bookworm aspect. He's, very much Robert Redford in 3 Days of the Condor. And he's, as much as they try and distinguish him from Bond, he's kind of just like if Bond woke up one morning and was like, who am I? What am I doing? Did I really kill 200 people at that volcanic base? Like, oh, God, they were only henchmen. They had families. And then he blames the government for making him do it.
That's definitely the case. He does echo those 70s heroes, but he also reminds me a lot of the 80s action heroes, whether it be like Rambo or a lot of the ones played by Seagal or Van Damme or whatever, where they exist to be the most efficient person at anything, like at any task required of them. And other characters just speak of them in odd tones, being like, we can't believe who this guy is. It's Jason Bourne. He can do anything. It's like they exist to be his kind of hype people.
Oh, yeah. Every government official serves as a Colonel Troutman. Like,
yes, exactly.
Colonel Troutman is essentially a character just set there, and I love Colonel Troutman to be like, he was trained to eat things that would make a billy goat puke. He's trained to be the best. Yeah. And they do that all the time with Jason Bourne. And the big thing about Jason Bourne that sort of distinguishes him from those, which, I mean, he is very much Rambo, but he's actually just Wolverine without the claws. Like, this is just Weapon X.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Down to even having Mr. Stryker.
And it's interesting that the Bourne franchise gets really popular kind of around the same time as the X-Men franchise, too.
Why Jason Bourne is so popular is because he was sort of an embodiment of our rage against things that we're not proud of. Like, all the horrible things that our government does. But beyond that, it really never went far enough to make a statement about it. At the end, it's not about oil or, what we did in Iraq or something like that. It's just about a guy who was made to be a trained killer for his government. That's it.
That's because post 9/11, America was a really weird place. Like, there was this acknowledgement that governments don't necessarily do good things all the time. There was this general fear and paranoia, and we don't know what's coming to get us. But we hadn't yet really figured out like how to work that into a real story or work that into somewhat of a message. And so there's all these movies back then where just like, yeah, and then the CIA is going to come, I guess. Like, sure, the CIA is there.
I mean, in one shot of Casino Royale, the opening just sort of displays what they are striving for with the Jason Bourne character, where, you have that noirish black and white, and Bond is in there to hit his last mark for his government, and the establishing shot of him grabbing the gun while there's a picture of his family and kids there does everything that the Bourne movies try to eventually build pathos with, but in one shot.
It seems to me, too, a lot of the kind of the pessimism of that sort of Bush era. You remember early on, after 9/11, there was a lot of movies about the Iraq War and about 9/11, and audiences did not respond to them. They just kept, it was like each one kept kind of tanking. And
yeah, Hollywood didn't know how to handle it.
Exactly. And it feels like they eventually figured out to work those themes into movies like this or The Dark Knight. And audiences really grabbed onto it because it told them fictional stories that they were hugely invested in while working in themes that were relating to the modern day. That's always been something that's happened in fiction. But at this point, it seemed like Hollywood wanted to be very literal initially.
Yeah, but while the Dark Knight trilogy, and specifically The Dark Knight, refers to terrorism, Jason Bourne doesn't really have much to say about 9/11. I mean,
Right.
or the Iraq War, whereas United 93 also doesn't have much to say about 9/11 or the Iraq War, and that's what's great about it, because United 93 just shows you the event without any jingoism, without saying anything, but in a perfect way.
Well, that's because United 93 is about the indomitable strength of people. Like it is about something. Even when you look at like Casino Royale, which came out the year before this, and I remember the fervor of Casino Royale, like, which we all love because it's a pretty great movie, but like the negative side of that was people going, "You're turning my Bond into Jason Bourne." Because he did start tackling, or he did start feeling like a real world again. And like Bond came out of the gates with making a pretty intense statement on 9/11 and people making profits from that. And like that's actually worked into the very plot of the show or the movie.
Yeah.
Well, let's guide this back to talking about some of our actors that have returned in this film. Obviously, Matt Damon's back as Jason Bourne for the third of his 4 trips into the character. How do you think
the role he was born to play?
Oh,
Oh,
how have we made it 2
Sorry.
episodes without
Who
making
made
that
that?
joke?
I have no idea.
I've been sitting on that for a while.
I wonder how the single guy made that dad joke.
I run a Mission Impossible podcast that mainly focuses on the TV show. I'm already a dad.
Fair enough.
What about Cam? What did you think? How did Matt Damon do?
I feel like Matt Damon, we are seeing him at his like movie star wattage, best. Like this is Matt Damon doing a lot with obviously very frustrating work circumstances. And I often question with especially these Greengrass Bourne movies, how much of an idea Matt Damon has in terms of the overall scope of the movie while he's shooting it, given the way that Greengrass works, assembling his sequences. It's got to just be like shooting fragments at a time and Damon being like, I guess. But I felt like he is so crucial to this franchise for grounding it and making it, making himself this anchor that you follow through. And I think this is one of his more committed action hero performances. And there's an intensity to him in this movie that it's funny when you get those, kind of flashbacks to the Bourne identity, where it's kind of this like more, a baby-faced young Matt Damon versus what we're seeing here, which is more of a hard-edged, secret agent type. So I think he's incredibly effective in this film.
What about you, Aaron?
I mean, I think Matt Damon does a good job. I really do. It's just that he doesn't have a ton to work with here. He's mainly just look serious and scowl and do some action sequences. And he is commanding, but I think that tends to be more because of the filmmaking than because he's really being given a chance to truly captivate us. It gets a little more interesting towards the end with him, but even then, I just don't think he gets to really show his range much here. Mm-hmm. He's kind of just serious and grim and moody the entire time. He's like, you know what he is? He's Angel from Buffy back in the day.
I think he gets those moments of humor, though, where he calls Pamela and is like, you look tired, Pamela. Like he's he's fun in moments. Like you work in those little bits of humor or the little human moments with, the other asset played by Edgar Ramírez or even the Julia Stiles character. I feel like there's enough. I said earlier, the Bourne character lacks the arc he had in Supremacy, which I thought was really effective, or even in Identity. But I feel like, Matt Damon is doing a lot with a little, like a lot.
Yeah, that's actually kind of how I feel. I mean, I've said it many times, this is a thinly plotted movie, but Matt Damon commits to every single bit of it, and you could never just look at this and be like, oh, that's a lazy Matt Damon performance. Because he's just always effective. I mean, this is 1 year after what I consider to be one of the best performances of his career in The Departed, where he is the slimy government asshole that Jason Bourne would hate. And obviously it's not on the same level of that, but he definitely doesn't slouch here. I think all the actors do a great job with what they have.
I would say he doesn't do anything bad. I just don't think he's given that much to work with in terms of range. But that's just where Jason Bourne is as a character at the time.
Agreed.
Yeah, I find myself really wishing that they hadn't locked this into being so tied with the second movie and had made this one the, like, this is 8 years later, who knows where he is and what's happening, and build the world that way instead of being like, no, half this movie is part of this second one.
I kind of like that this movie uses just all the pathos from Supremacy to allow itself to be just a fun little chase movie, action movie ride, where you can't just be like, oh, this is just a glorification of violence, because you're like, well, remember what happened in the second movie? Which, if you take this on its own, it does seem like a glorification of violence.
But it also has like an immediacy because it follows so shortly after. Like you're still kind of barreling after the events of what happened in the previous one. I don't know that like the average, moviegoer really thought that much. I can't say that I thought that much about it when I saw it in 2007, but I did feel like watching them in fairly close proximity for this podcast, I felt like the momentum carried from one to the other in a way that was somewhat effective.
Agreed. I think the thing about these movies is that they're designed so that you really don't think much about them critically.
It doesn't give you a chance to think.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's mindless. It doesn't engage you in any real thought, but it does what it does very effectively, and you can't deny the quality of it.
But that chase scene, though, basically, it's like, oh, it's so good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, which chase scene are you talking
exactly.
about?
That's what I was going to say.
I was specifically speaking of the chasing with Julia Stiles, but any of them. It would still apply for any of them.
Bourne versus Dash, though, is so great.
Well, that whole
entire
sequence, yeah,
that sequence is what I was talking about.
yeah, exactly. It's in Tangiers where it's based, basically. The whole thing in Tangiers from beginning to end is the best bit of the film, hands down.
It has perfect momentum, especially as he's hopping from rooftop to rooftop, and that jump, that effective jump where they actually had the cameraman jump through the window with him, which, I mean, windows break in movies all the time and it doesn't really do stuff, so fuck you, anybody who says this is a thinking man's action movie. But it really does like have a perfect momentum, and then it leads to a fight scene that is like a shaky cam version of like the hand-to-hand combat you see in the Raid films.
Well, so you know what it is, and I think Cam hit this earlier. It's that for all that you can say about Paul Greengrass's shooting style, he and his production team understand geography of action and how important that is. Like, it's something that a lot of mid-grade action films tend to forget. Being very careful to show where everyone is and where they are in relation to each other. And, from where Julia Stiles is sitting, she can't see him, but she can see the other one. All of that little work they do helps keep the audience engaged. It helps you understand what's happening so that there's never a point where you're having to go, wait a minute, why is Bourne jumping from that building to that building when he was in the other one? Because you always know where Bourne is doing, what he's doing, and why. It is delightful. I'm a big, I get hard onto action geography in films. It's one of the things I like to look for, and it's nice when they nail it.
What I also love in that chase, too, is the moment of calm, where we get that second where Julia Stiles is like looking out the window, trying to figure out where the, Desh, the asset is. Damon just stops on the rooftop and is watching, and then the cops are stopping and watching him. And it's like this moment of just waiting because you know the action's about to kick in again. But it's a confidence move because a lot of movies would not have the confidence to do that. Drawing maybe a questionable example, but a great action scene. You think of The Phantom Menace with the big lightsaber battle with Darth Maul. And you have that moment where all the barriers go up and Darth Maul's pacing back and forth. Qui-Gon's meditating. It's all character-based. And it's the type of moment in an action scene that if you can pull it off, I think is hugely effective.
Well, this actually kind of reminds me of something that, people who will listen to me on Mission Impossible will not hear me talk about this for a long, long time, but Mission Impossible Fallout was designed in a lot of ways by Christopher McQuarrie to have these beats that keep the amount of insane action in that movie from overwhelming audiences, which, we mentioned Six Underground, let's mention it again. That movie overwhelms audiences. And if you just look at Bourne Ultimatum, it is wall-to-wall action. Same with Supremacy. But Paul Greengrass knows where to put those small little breaths, and he makes them short, just enough to catch your breath, but still to feel like a roller coaster for you.
Like they feel very tense.
Exactly.
Even if they are these moments of calm. Yeah, because you're just waiting for the trigger to go off again.
Well, and they're not just a pause, like they serve a purpose too.
Mhm.
It's a moment to truly sit and collect yourself and realize what everyone's doing and where they are. And so it really serves to help the audience understand things before shit starts exploding.
And that kind of applies too to the chase sequence at Waterloo Station at the beginning. There's that moment where the reporter starts talking to Jason Bourne, and you've got that sort of 30 seconds to breathe where he gives you a little bit of what's going on, but you're still tense the entire time. It's perfect.
That whole sequence, that Waterloo sequence, I think might be my favorite in the movie. Like, I don't know. I really do go back and forth between the Tangier chase and that Waterloo Station sequence. I mean, that Waterloo sequence, I remembered being just on the edge of my seat seeing it in theaters. And that was like the one section that really did grab me when I saw it the first time. And watching it again, it still worked just gangbusters.
And one upgrade on my experience is I know that station very well, and they used the geography correctly. They actually used the right entrances and exits. I was sitting there going, that's exactly where you would be going. And he's going in that direction. That's the door you would come out. So, yeah. Waterloo Station fans, there you heard it first.
Yeah, I feel like we haven't really lumped on as much praise to Paul Greengrass as we really should. I mean, he uses a very simple approach to storytelling, but the structure works. Like, every action beat hits just at the right moment. You see exactly the ways that Bourne processes how he's going to get out of trouble. It's always taut, it's always intense, and there's really not a wasted moment in this movie. I can't imagine going through here and being like, I could cut out this.
Well, I want to say that this or Supremacy was nominated for editing.
Yeah, this
one was nominated and won.
There you go. Yeah.
Every award this movie was nominated for, it won.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me.
It also won Best Sound Mixing and Sound Effects Editing. So, yeah.
Well, we've spoken about the pacing and the camera work, but let's speak a bit more about the characters. And I can finally be happy that Julia Stiles has second billing in this film and actually has a bit more of a presence after 3 films.
Yeah, she actually does the thing.
Yeah.
She's a bit wasted in this movie still, though. I love Julia Stiles.
I'll take it over the first one.
Definitely. Oh, for sure. And the second.
Yeah.
I feel like, though, Julia Stiles is put in the position here in many ways as Franca Potente in the original Bourne film. They even echo moments from that first film where Julia Stiles is dyeing her hair and all that sort of stuff. And Julia Stiles, to me, is just, she lacks the expressive qualities that Franca Potente had. So I feel like there's not as much of a connection between her and Damon. Like, there's definitely allusions to her having a relationship with him in the past before he went to Treadstone. But I just don't really feel like this stuff's coming across. I feel like it's more just there for us to pick up and go, okay, cool. But I feel like this character is still just not given enough for me to really latch onto.
That's strange. I really got it. The scene where they're barely talking to each other about their past, I really dug that scene. I thought they really communicated well without saying much.
It's interesting. I never really thought about how similar she was to Franca Potemkin's character in the first 2 movies, but I'm pretty sure she even ends up in a very similar situation to Franca in the second movie, too. I don't want to necessarily give an explicit spoiler to the 4th one.
Yeah.
But she is the exact same character, basically. Okay.
What about you, Nathan?
I've never seen the 4th film or the 5th film because once I came out of this, I was just like, that's enough. That's all I need of that.
Yeah.
But I think Julia Stiles is good. I think just by nature, this movie is designed not to make you think about the relationships between the characters, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's weird that we said this before, me and Aaron talking in a chat, but we're really kind of giving this movie a lot of backhanded compliments, but it is effective at everything it sets out to do.
Well, yeah, and I think the movie, as much as I say it kind of lacks the connection for me in terms of the relationship that you got in the first one, that movie also spends far more time establishing that relationship. Whereas this one, I mean, how long are her and Matt Damon really together? Like maybe half an hour, 40 minutes? It's not that long, and then she's put on a bus, and that's the last we see of her. So, like, it's kind of trying to do it more in a shorthand way. I don't know if at the time that they thought they would bring any of those characters back, so I'm curious, like, kind of why, but yeah.
I feel like any character in this franchise who isn't like in the boardrooms or the conference rooms, especially the women, kind of gets done dirty, at least the side characters. Because, like, Julia Stiles, you're right, she doesn't have much to do in any of the movies on her own, yet she's one of the kind of major figures in all four of them. But, like, Pamela Landing, like, her character, she gets to be a lot more robust in this. She gets to be more of a character who gets to do something. She has a goal. And it feels like the thrust of the plot and the story is all happening with those characters, the people in the boardrooms. And then Julia Stiles and Matt Damon are just kind of like, you know what, we're pretty and we're enjoying this, and let's just kind of show up and try to do our thing.
And we just stare at each other a lot quietly.
Yeah. But like, I did enjoy their sequence together. I think it was Scott, like, he said it right, that moment where they do start to allude to the deeper relationship they had, they did that very well. I just wish that had been expanded upon.
Right.
Show me more about that connection so that these are the characters I'm interested in instead of the other ones.
Well, that's the thing about these films I've sort of mentioned in the previous episodes, is it doesn't do a lot for female characters, the Bourne series, at least up until this point. And you think of that scene with Jason Bourne and Nikki Parsons. That's the last time she speaks in the film. She doesn't say a single word. She's in another 20 minutes, the whole chase sequence through Tangier, getting on the bus, dyeing her hair, but she doesn't say a word.
Really?
I'll do you one better. I don't think this series does much for characters.
That's also fair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of them are more like archetypes than actual characters. I do think, though, Pamela Landy is a very, I think, well-drawn character. So I would say that she is probably the best written female character they have in that franchise. And I think her role feels boosted up even more in this film. She's obviously the one who's more often than not in the right, or the one who knows what's going on in all of these scenes with the, her and David Strathairn going back and forth. He's the one that's coming out looking like an ass.
Yeah, I'm glad they put that character in of Noah Vosen to give the CIA someone like a heat magnet, basically. Because you couldn't have Pam Landy leading the chase against Bourne again.
Well, she's kind of the hero of the movie.
Yep.
Yeah.
She's the one that's actually going to affect change. Matt Damon doesn't really do that. A lot of what Matt Damon's mission is entirely personal. It's about finding out who he is and, what his life could be going forward. For her, I mean, she's the one who's ultimately going to be, in many ways, the whistleblower on everything that's been going on.
Yeah. So I'm glad they chose to bring Pam Landy back. Always happy to see Joan Allen in the film. But apart from that, no other female characters in the whole film?
No, not really, other than anonymous, people typing at computers.
Yeah.
Not even a Michelle Monaghan.
No.
I don't even think they ever show his mom in the franchise either, because the fourth one is all about, like, his dad and how much his dad knew about everything and how it's tied to his family. But even there, it's his dad and never a mom. Does the Bourne franchise just hate women?
Isn't that the story of, like, all action heroes, though, of a certain era that was always daddy issues? So I can totally get behind that. I'm curious, though, what did you guys think of David Strathairn as this opposite to Landy? I mean, David Strathairn's coming in shortly after an Oscar nomination for Good Night and Good Luck. This was probably the Strathairn high, I think, probably of all time for his career. And, how did you think he fared opposite Joan Allen and hunting down Jason Bourne?
Oh, he's great. I mean, he is the meme. Like, when he shows up, he says, Jesus Christ, it's Jason Bourne. And every line he says, he doesn't chew up scenery, but he chews up just the right amount of scenery. I mean, everybody who acts in this movie does their job. It's inexplicable that I'm giving so many backhanded compliments, because I think all the quality is there,
I'm just glad they had someone on to take the heat from Pam Landy. And it's a bit of a thankless role, having to be the guy who's always outwitted by someone.
I love the moment where he's like, that's not true, because I'd be talking to you face to face in your office right now.
Oh, it's so great.
When Noah Vosen has taken all his people out of the CIA headquarters and Damon's broken in, like, it's so genius.
I just got that Naked Gun scene in my head where everyone slaps their forehead when that happened. Just like, go!
Genius. But I also like that Noah isn't like the kind of he's not the Brian Cox, just like mustache twirling, like evil man in the room. He's a guy who obviously has very objectionable motives, but he's someone who's more of a bureaucratic type than a actual, sociopathic mastermind.
I think anytime you get David Strathairn in a movie, like, this is kind of what he does. He's great at being, I call them the gentle villain, where, like, they will do evil, horrible, unrepentant things, and he'll do it calmly because, no, there's a logic to it. Like, between that and the conference room leader, like, he's done this kind of a role over and over and over again. And kind of like anytime you have William H. Macy show up in a movie, David Strathairn always brings his A game. So I'm down with him always showing up and stuff. He's fun.
And in a lot of movies, he would be the less showy villain. The asset would be the big flashy one that the audience actually cares about. And you kind of get at the end sort of like the Noah character was arrested, in like a just brief tagline because that character is not that interesting. Whereas I feel like in this movie, I am just gripped every time he's on screen.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, they cast everybody in the government so well, from David Strathairn to Brian Cox to Scott Glenn. I mean, you just get all these incredible character actors.
Scott Glenn's there because of Silence of the Lambs, right?
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, that's a bit of typecasting, but it works.
In the same way that Tommy Lee Jones was there in that most recent one because of The Fugitive.
Sure, yeah.
The only other character I wanted to sort of tackle before we moved into anything else was Edgar Ramírez playing Paz, which is the Blackbriar agent, which is meant to be better than Bourne. He's somewhat referred to as, although he doesn't seem to be anywhere near Bourne.
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue with these. I won't even call it an issue because it really isn't. They always get somebody who is supposed to be the counter to Bourne. I mean, Carl Urban, Clive Owen, Edgar Ramírez. They're always supposed to be like the person who's trained with the capability of Bourne, who could take out Bourne. But we know these movies and we know these actors, and we know that A, they are capable of more, or, later show that they were capable of more. And B, that Jason Bourne's going to make it out of this movie.
That was my issue with it, was the fact that Jason Bourne is a Treadstone operative, but they make a big point of saying that Paz is a Blackbriar operative, which is meant to be better than Treadstone, and everything that Bourne's defeated so far has been Treadstone. So this is supposed to be the new nemesis, but he doesn't even make a scratch.
Well, it's the problem you run into with these kinds of movies, is that because you're doing the dumb action movie, you have to up your stakes every time. And you start hitting points where you're trying to up your stakes and make something that is dangerous to your characters so that you can believably think maybe he's not going to make it out. But you also are sitting there doing double duty and trying to make Bourne look like a badass, like specifically. And it's hard to make someone have a struggle to win when they're also looking like a badass. Like, I think honestly, out of all three of the movies, I think the first one handles the actual agent to agent fights the best, because you either have the super intense, quick, bloody action of that biker guy who he fights in the apartment, which is brutal and intense and everybody gets hurt and it's shocking, or you have his fight with Clive Owen, which instead plays like a chess match. It's a lot of quiet and thought and deliberation before you make a move, and that adds to the tension. By the time you get here, it's just he's a minion.
Aaron, you touched on something I really find in a lot of these dumb action movies, as you will say, where they try to get somebody who can counter their protagonist. But yeah, they try and have it both ways, where they make their protagonist a badass. One of my favorite examples is in the movie Demolition Man, when you have Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes both as like expert marksmen, but they're both shooting at each other in a museum and barely landing a shot. Like, there's not an entire moment. John Wick does it really well, where you actually see him be winded and there is actual like combat. I honestly think they should have gotten whoever played the Desh character in the Tangier sequence to be the Edgar Ramírez role, because he actually seemed to counter him.
Yeah, and this kind of reminds me a little bit too of this popular franchise thing of as you said, Scott, this is the next level. And in this movie, they start talking about Blackbriar, and you're like, well, Blackbriar, what's that? Oh, that's the next thing after Treadstone. It reminds me a lot of, the First Order comes after the Empire, or whatever the hell they called the new generation of cyborgs in Terminator, the last Terminator movie, versus what came before. It's like, it's basically the same thing, guys.
Or every genetically modified dinosaur to be stronger than the T-Rex in any of the Jurassic World movies.
Exactly. It's like they throw off a name, so you're supposed to sit forward like, oh, well, how's this going to play out? But Edgar Ramírez does not come across as more competent than Karl Urban in Supremacy. I think Karl Urban was more effective because he had more screen time. And I do think the big car chase that Karl Urban has is more effective than the car chase in this film. So...
Yeah, Karl Urban is somehow one of the most developed actual physical villains in this franchise somehow. I wouldn't have expected that, considering he's literally just in it for the money. He's just paid to go do this stuff.
I think that Edgar Ramírez serves his role as more being a mirror to Jason Bourne for that third act to sort of hit home. And it works. It works as well as it should, but he never really comes off as a legitimate threat to Bourne.
Well, and it also is replicating a moment from the last film where after the car crash, in this case, the Ramírez character is seemingly crippled in his car, and Matt Damon just walks away and leaves him. And that's the same thing he did to Karl Urban in Supremacy. In that movie, Karl Urban died in that sequence. But in this case, Ramírez lives and then wants to know why he didn't kill him. So you're kind of getting more of a payoff off a thematic idea that existed in the previous film. And that's really what Ramírez's main job is. I mean, he's important early on in the scene in the Waterloo terminal for assassinating the journalist. But other than that, he's there for that moment to stand out there on the building over the water and talk to Matt Damon about, their lifestyle.
Exactly. And it's not as much a legit criticism of the film. I mean, we talked about all those other examples. Those are full-on ridiculous examples, especially one I always think of as the Super Predator and the new Predator movie. It's a little ridiculous, that this movie manages to work as well as it does, despite being so stupid in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I'm wondering how much of this comes back to the script, because Edgar Ramírez is this character. I think you're right, Nathan. He does a good job. None of our issues with the character, I think, are really laid at Edgar Ramírez's feet. It's just that he doesn't really have much. He doesn't do as much as you think he should, and I can easily see a lot of these issues being caused by them being okay, well, we gotta kind of have to be okay with this. We'll try to figure it out on set and maybe tweak some of the dialogue. But I'm thinking it's that fly-by-night approach that they had to have to the story that's causing this.
One of my favorite moments, though, with Ramírez is when he's activated. He's just laying in his bed, staring blankly ahead. And it reminded me a lot of Michael Keaton in Batman Returns, where he's just sitting in Gotham Manor, just staring off into space. The bat signal goes off, and then he suddenly comes to life. It's these assets have no life other than to spring to life when they are called upon.
That is a weirdly deep cut.
I know, right?
Well, right. Before we move on to the question, which consumes us all, has anyone got any final thoughts about the Bourne Ultimatum? I'll throw it out to Aaron first.
I mean, I really want to like this movie more than I do. I think there's a lot here that's great about it. I think that the actors are giving it their all, and it's still, I remember thinking this when I saw it, and I've seen it probably twice since then. This is a perfectly fine, fun action movie with some legitimately great sequences. I think that Matt Damon and Paul Greengrass, the creators should definitely be proud of what they put out. It's just that, man, it could be better. And that's kind of a frustrating experience sometimes watching something where you're going, oh man, if only you did just this little bit more, that you would be a legitimately great movie instead of a fun movie.
Nathan?
Yeah, I see. I'm aligned with you, but I'm not aligned with you, Aaron. I really think that this is as good as this script could have handled itself, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think this is as good of a Bourne movie as we've gotten. I think that it takes all of the things that are great about the Bourne franchise and encapsulates it into one movie that never wastes your time. And I never would I didn't go see this in a theater, but if I went to go see this in a theater, I wouldn't come out of it feeling robbed. I mean, I picked up the box set, which was $15. I would have paid $15 for Bourne Ultimatum because it effectively does everything that it sets out to do. And it's my favorite of the franchise.
Interesting.
What about you, Cam?
For me, this movie is just such a triumph technically that it's hard for me to discount it and say it's not quite as good as the previous one. It's just it's working at a level we wish most movies would work at when we go to see a popcorn movie in the theater. As I said, the action is incredible. I just want to give a shout out to John Powell, who I think his score at this point is a character all to itself. I think his work in this franchise is absolutely fantastic and brings so much life to each movie and to these action sequences. When that music kicks in, that's a big part of the reason that, you're hugely invested in and on the edge of your seat. It's like the Bond theme at this point. For me, it just comes down to, it does have more of that Return of the Jedi. We have to wrap things up. We've got to give payoff. The payoff isn't as strong as I would have hoped. But at the end of the day, Matt Damon, he's in the water and he's swimming away, keeping the metaphor of Bourne being reborn in each film in water. So, it really does bookend this franchise beautifully. Unfortunately, there was 2 more to go, so we'll see how that pays off in the future. But in terms of, ending a Bourne trilogy with Matt Damon, I think it's a pretty fantastic, effort.
Hey, it's got the Moby.
It's interesting you mentioned the whole reborn in water, because that was something I definitely noted down. It does have this theme again, because the first one starts in water and this one ends in water, more or less. And it does have that finale feel to it. So it's interesting that they do have 2 more films, and I'll be curious to figure out why they have 2 more films, because I don't recall them. So there is that. I had 2 little notes. The first one was, did you guys know that Norton Antivirus is CIA approved? So bizarre seeing that on my screen. Why on earth would they use Norton Antivirus?
I mean, I guess, was it CIA approved in those days? Who knows?
And can anyone explain to me why Bourne found that bit of paper in that guy's briefcase that had the CIA's address and then instantly knew what to do from that? Did he not know the address beforehand?
Plot.
Okay.
Plot.
Yep, okay.
I guess it was pointing towards the New York division, right? Is that why he just knew to go to the New York headquarters?
I guess. I just sort of saw it and thought, why on earth does he need to know that information? But
right.
Plot. I guess you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here we go. The question: does the Bourne Ultimatum join the NOC list? Gentlemen, you're our guests, so we're going to go to Aaron first. Is the Ultimatum making the list?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think it is a perfectly great, fun movie involving spies, but because so much of it is wrapped up in Bourne's specific past, and so much of it is wrapped up in really internal matters, it ends up not really feeling like a spy movie so much as just a movie about corruption in the U.S. government. But at least that's me. That's my read.
Okay. What about you, Nathan?
First, just to respond to Aaron, it's interesting that you said that this movie was about something. No. Actually, I grappled with this a lot. So you guys obviously historically had your conflict with Bourne Identity, where it didn't end up making the NOC list, but it came really close. Then you had Bourne Supremacy, which made the NOC list, which, as it should, it really was groundbreaking as far as its style. It's not personally one of my favorite spy movies, and neither is this one. But if I have to put an example for the Bourne franchise, I would put the best one, and in my opinion, this is the best one. So yeah, it goes in the NOC list for me.
Okay. So we have a split. And this is the first time we have 4 votes for the NOC list. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes next. Cam, you're up.
Yeah, I struggled quite a bit with this one. And I'm going to come down on a yes for this one because I think when we look at this as, the way they've taken Bourne's story, the way they're paying off, everything they've been building up to the last couple movies, I think it really does deliver with the exception of that big reveal with Albert Finney at the end. It's all well acted. It works, but it's not like a big bombshell going off. But in terms of the filmmaking, in terms of the characterizations, in terms of everything they've done, building this franchise from, step one to here, I think it pays off so wonderfully that I have a hard time imagining myself not saying to someone, if you want a spy action movie, don't watch the Bourne Ultimatum. That one's not on the NOC list. I'm like, this is one of the best examples out there of a spy action film. So I'm going to say a yes for those reasons.
Okay. Right. Well,
it's all on you, man.
Well, this is going to be very interesting because I'll cut right to the chase, and it's a no from me.
Oh shit.
So basically, where I sit with this film is the Bourne Identity was like a journey of self-discovery. It wasn't really a spy film. It was a character piece. The Bourne Supremacy was a spy thriller, I would say. This feels just like an action film with maybe the odd element of spy. Now, I'm not knocking this film. I mean, there's plenty of great films that haven't made our NOC list so far. I'm thinking of Man from U.N.C.L.E., for instance. That's a fantastic film that has some spy elements and is mostly an action film.
Right.
And I feel like Bourne Ultimatum is just like one step below Supremacy. And and that doesn't mean that we can only have one film from a series. We could have all of the films if they're good enough. But I just feel like this film has taken a step back from the spy, and it's more about the heart-pumping action. And that's, for me, why it's a no.
Interesting. You see, where I struggle with this is knowing where we're going. The next 2 Bournes don't exactly have the level of prestige attached to them that this one does. And so that's where I'm kind of battling with myself, and that Supremacy was an easy in for me, whereas this one I did struggle a little more with. So I guess I have a bit of ground to give potentially, but I get a little wary just about knowing that we're saying that Bourne Supremacy is the only representative worthy of inclusion. I guess that's where I struggle.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm going to lean on Aaron to help back me up on this one.
Well, but now, so I struggle with that too a little bit, but like Bourne Supremacy feels the most like a spy movie. Like even when you get into Bourne Legacy, I actually kind of enjoy that for the most part. I think they do some interesting things with the program, but even that movie, it's not really about people being spies. It's about the government trying to clean up. It's a cover up and the people affected by it. And 4, like, I'll be honest, I watched 4 around the same time. I watched the whole Bourne franchise like 5 weeks ago before I even knew I was doing this. I just happened to watch the whole franchise on a lark, and then you asked me to do this and was like, yes, I will rewatch Ultimatum. But I don't even remember what 4 is about. I remember a few snippets of it, and I remember, like, ultimately it had something to do with his dad. But the franchise as a whole seems more like, yes, there are people who would be spies involved in this, but this isn't about spies. This is about what happens when you try to cover up something and it gets found out. Like, there's never really a point where Bourne is actively working with or against foreign agents, like actual governments. It's never about the governments. It's always about a cover-up within the U.S. government.
I think Nathan said it earlier. This is a chase film.
Yeah.
Right.
It has our characters that we love from our previous films, but it really isn't a spy film in any sense of the word, other than it has characters that have been spies or work for agencies.
Yeah.
But is North by Northwest not a chase film?
Yeah. Or even, like, I mean, the other Bourne movies kind of are too.
Yeah. This is exactly the same as Supremacy. Like, as much as this is Supremacy without the fat, and it's the question, like, do you want the steak minus the fat?
Well, so here's the question, though, and honestly, this is me asking: are any of the Bourne movies actually traditional spy films. Like, do any of them involve the game of statecraft, really? Or is it all entirely just a chase films about corrupt government officials trying to cover up a mistake?
You're absolutely correct on that, but you need to understand the impact that these films had on the spy genre, regardless.
Absolutely
And
meritable.
and you could say that Supremacy, while it did hit the ground running with the style, this is where the style is even more refined.
So let me ask you then, what does Ultimatum do that Supremacy doesn't?
And that's an excellent question. That's where I'm struggling, honestly, because I am battling with myself at the moment about, because when you have these two Paul Greengrass films, they're both kind of doing the same types of things. So it's like, do we just, induct the one that did it we feel the best, and we just need the one representative of the Paul Greengrass Bourne films? And maybe that's the case, because when we talk about James Bond, Scott and I have inducted Goldeneye, and we've inducted Dr. No. Those are from completely different directors, completely different representations of James Bond on screen. So it makes more sense versus what we're seeing here, where you have two movies made, 3 years apart, that in a lot of ways are very similar to one another.
Although I am going to sit here and, now that we're talking about it, say that I'm going to, in the future, throw my imaginary has no weight decision on the NOC list, really, for potentially Bourne Legacy, because for all that movie is, it's very much a personal journey. It, at least, you can go, this is what being these agents does to a general, just generic agent. Like, this is the toll it takes on them. They have to do this, and they have to take all these medications, and it changes their bodies. And like, it can at least be, you can argue it from that standpoint.
Okay, so you think of North by Northwest, which sort of set the style for what later the Bond movies did. And then you have From Russia with Love, which came much later, or not even much later, just a few years later, and essentially does a lot of the same stuff that North by Northwest does, and a lot of the same stuff that Dr. No does. To say that that film could possibly be in the NOC list, which I would put it in the NOC list, despite it being derivative of the others, it really just questions, are two similar movies that do essentially the same thing not allowed to both be in the NOC list?
Yeah, and that's the conflict. But really thinking about it, I feel like I'm the one who's potentially going to waver either way, right? Like, I feel like I'm the one that's kind of the closest to maybe budging. I feel like you three are pretty set. Am I correct in that?
You would be correct in that assessment.
I'm decently set. I'm getting less confident as you guys are talking, but yeah, I'll stand by my morals. Sure, no compromise.
Yeah, there's no budging me on this one. I made up my mind when I watched it the first time. Even when I watched it back again the second time, I still was there.
So ultimately then, the answer is it doesn't make it on. Because if it's a split, it doesn't make it on the list. If I flip and say no, it doesn't make it on the list. So ultimately, neither way, the Bourne Ultimatum is going to make it on the list. So I think I'm going to stick with my yes, but I think we're going to have more of a conflicted no on the Bourne Ultimatum, which is actually, I think, more interesting and says maybe more for the movie, that for some people it offers a lot, and others it's maybe a step down in a way that doesn't quite deserve the inclusion. I think that's actually more of a tribute to the movie than a firm one way or the other.
I'm sure that when we get to the Bourne Legacy and Jason Bourne, I might eat my words when I say this, but I don't know those films well enough to have an opinion already.
Right.
So I can't prejudge this film because the other ones might be worse.
That's fair, because that's how it was when we all saw Bourne Ultimatum too. Like, we knew that they were working on Legacy at the time, and it came shortly after, but it's still, we hadn't seen it. And Jason Bourne came out ages later. So I think that's a fair way to view Bourne Ultimatum.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there you have it. It seems like it's our first tie. 2 yeses and 2 nos, and therefore the Bourne Ultimatum is not making the NOC list. And with that revelation, the dossier on the Bourne Ultimatum is complete and filed as classified. Now, gentlemen, Nathan, Aaron, thank you for joining us. Can you tell the folks at home a little bit more about the Impodible podcast and where they can find you?
Yeah, I guess I'll take the lead as As per usual, I will be the leader of this IMF. Yeah, guys, if you guys are interested in hearing us talk about probably the one spy franchise that didn't take anything from the Bourne franchise's like impact on spy cinema, uh, listen to Mission Impodible. We have all of our podcasts wherever you can find podcasts at Spotify, iTunes. We mainly go through Spreaker, but you can go wherever. We have our Twitter where you'll hear us sort of pimp you guys out and pimp each other out. We're kind of like, we've been Spy Bros since the beginning, so we sort of help each other. But yeah, if you guys want to dive into the Mission Impossible franchise from the very, very beginning, you can hear me and Aaron every Tuesday or sometimes Wednesday. Life is hard.
You can also follow me on Twitter at Father Baldor, and you can hear Nathan and I sometimes appear on oneofus.net. I work with the host of that site to do a home release podcast, and Nathan and I both show up on movie reviews too.
Yeah, and you can also find me on Twitter at Nathan Flynn. Not saying much of anything because I'm normally managing the Impodible Twitter.
Which is very active, so follow them on Twitter for sure.
Exactly.
And Instagram as well. You're over there too.
Yes, we are. Thank you for plugging better than I can.
It's all I do every day. There we are. So, again, thank you for joining us, gentlemen. Cam, what are we doing next week?
We are going to celebrate Christmas, Scott, and we're going to do that by revisiting 1996's The Long Kiss Goodnight, directed by Rennie Harlan and starring Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson.
And written by Shane Black.
That's right.
Dun, 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 dun.
There you go.
I'm dreaming of a black Christmas.
Well, on that note, grab your mistletoe and jingle your bells as we'll be doing our very first Christmas episode next week. Now, gentlemen, sorry for stealing your line, but your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to watch The Long Kiss Goodnight before next week. And don't forget to follow us discreetly, of course, at SpyHards, that's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners, good luck among the shadows.